Hi friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing the mid-year freakout tag. I have read 67 books this year. I have met my Goodreads reading challenge a little bit earlier than I normally do because of the COVID lockdown situation. And I would say it's definitely affected the type of reading that I've been doing, the quality of the reading that I've been doing. So it'll be interesting, I think, to maybe reflect on this at the end of the year, like come back to look at the 2 months that I was fully in the house, fully locked down, no longer at work, and think about those books a little bit. Number one is the best book that I've read so far in 2020. Hands down, that is A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. This is a weird and magical story. This is set shortly after the tsunami. Our main character, Ruth, is an author in BC, and she's walking along the beach one day and there's a bag that she finds on the beach, and she's worried about there being a foot in the bag. She wonders if this bag is debris from the tsunami, and so she has her husband open this bag, and inside the bag is a Hello Kitty lunchbox, and inside the Hello Kitty lunchbox is a journal and letters. Ruth starts reading the diary of Now and learning about this girl and her life, and she's watching Now sort of spiral out of control and is worried about Now harming herself. And so for Ruth, this is like one part mystery because she's trying to find out who Now is based on like the people that she's talking about and her family members, and like getting pieces translated because she can't read this older formal Japanese in the letters, and she can't read the French. There are some notes in French as well, and so it's like a collaborative research process of trying to find out who Now is, like as a human in the world. And it's another part like almost magical realism, real versus not real. It's so good, and I can't believe it took me as long as it did to read this book. This has been on my TBR for a super long time. Question number two is the best sequel you've read so far in 2020. I feel like I haven't read a lot of sequels, and like best is like So like I read To All the Boys I Loved Before, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars, and then I read P.S. I Still Love You, and I gave that 4 out of 5 stars. And then I read The Long Way to a Small and Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, and I gave that 4.5 stars. And then I read A Closed and Common Orbit, also by Becky Chambers, which is a very loose sequel, and I gave that 4 stars. Ooh! Tunnel of Bones by Victoria Schwab is the second book in a series, and I did give it 5 out of 5 stars. So that is my answer. Everything else, the sequel has not lived up to the first. So I guess we can talk about Tunnel of Bones by V.E. Schwab. This is a piece of middle grade fiction. It is about a girl whose parents are ghost hunters from like the hippy dippy perspective and the historical perspective, and they have booked this reality TV show where they travel around the world to the world's most haunted sites and they hunt for ghosts. The twist is that they don't actually experience the supernatural, but their daughter does. Their daughter actually sees ghosts. She has the power to help spirits move from our world beyond the veil into death and to find peace. And so as they're moving around to the world's most haunted historical sites, it's an interesting time for their daughter. And the sequel, Tunnel of Bones, takes place in the Paris catacombs, and I loved it because it resulted in me doing quite a bit of research on the Paris catacombs and like dead things. The deathling in me just loves looking at dead things, apparently. Question number 3 is a new release you haven't read yet but want to. And so I have 2 books here that I am equally stalled on. The first one that I have here is If It Bleeds by Stephen King. I have read the first 2 little novella short stories in this collection, and I read this alongside reading The Stand, and it was just too much Stephen King in a time when the constant readers of the internet were also like getting bored in lockdown and becoming really like ugly and aggressive to me on like a daily basis. So I kind of lost interest. I would like to finish it before the year is out, before it comes out in paperback, because I paid for the hardcover. The next book that is a new release that I would like to finish before the end of the year is The Down Days by Ilse Hugo. So this is a piece of pandemic fiction set in Africa. It's about a laughing plague. How do you deal with a plague that is something that humans do naturally? I thought it sounded amazing. I thought it looked beautiful, and like I impulse purchased it, which I'm really trying not to do, but I did impulse buy it, and I wanted to read it right away because I impulse bought it. But then again, reading The Stand, which is a plague novel alongside a second plague novel at the same time, wasn't working, so I decided to put it down and I want to come back to it. So most anticipated release for the second half of the year, I am really trying not to look at new releases as part of tackling my physical TBR, because my partner and I are looking to move in together, purchase a house. The houses we're looking at are small, so I am trying not to add to my collection, and part of my strategy for that is to avoid hyped new releases and like pre-ordering anything. I am really trying to avoid the pre-order, which I know is bad for authors. Authors do like the pre-order, but the pre-order is bad for my impulse buying. So I haven't looked at a lot of new releases. I actually don't know what's coming out in the second half of the year, and I kind of want to keep it that way. Question number 5 is the biggest disappointment. Biggest disappointment, hands down, was Lyrial by Garth Nix. So I read and loved Sabriel. I loved Sabriel so much. She is a necromancer. There's like all these creepy dead creatures. There's magic. There's moving like beyond the veil into death, and like the river of death, and like just everything about that book I loved, and I loved Sabriel. I was so excited for the rest of the series because I loved Sabriel so much, only to discover that Lyrial and Aborson, the next 2 books in the series, are not focused on Sabriel at all. They are focused on Lyrial and Sabriel's son Samith. I mean, I think if I had started with Lyrial as the first book, I probably would have loved it a lot more, because Lyrial is a magical librarian in this like huge magical library. And so this, I think, has been the biggest disappointment, because I was so looking forward to this whole Old Kingdom series as like finding maybe almost a new Tamora Pierce series, like something that I really loved. I just don't love Lyrial as much as I love Sabriel, because I think my expectations were too high. The biggest surprise is The Fireman by Joe Hill. So after reading and hating The Stand, my patron exclusive book club and I decided to read The Fireman, which is like directly inspired by Stephen King's The Stand. And after reading and hating The Stand for a second time, I read it the first time and hated it, and then I read it a second time trying to be open-minded and hated it. I was not looking forward to picking up a book that is like directly inspired by a book that I hated, and was so incredibly grateful that I enjoyed this book. So this is about a much more magical plague. It's the dragon scale plague that causes people to develop these beautiful gold and black scaly markings on their body before bursting into flame. This is about Harper, who is a nurse at a hospital working with these plague victims, and then ends up infected herself, and things sort of go from there. I loved that we had one like narrative point of view. That was one of my biggest issues with The Stand, and I was definitely expecting that sort of massive cast of characters that I'm just not a fan of, and I was happy that there was one character that we were centrally focused on, and it just made it feel much more manageable. It's wonderful that it is like nothing like The Stand. Question number 7 is favorite new author, debut or new to me, and that would be Becky Chambers. So the book club that I am a part of in real life decided to read The Long Way to a Small and Angry Planet, and it was pitched as like feminist Star Trek, more feminist Star Trek. I am not the biggest fan of science fiction. I know that's gonna sound really weird because I do genuinely love Star Trek The Next Generation and like starting to get into Voyager. For some reason, I guess I'm more open to sci-fi in television than books, but I mean, I loved the first 2 books in this series. I'm excited to get to the 3rd book. I am excited to have discovered Becky Chambers and have actually enjoyed the science fiction that she's producing. I find science fiction hard. Science fiction is something that I struggle with. Like, I want to be more into science fiction and I'm not. Question 8 is my newest fictional crush. I do not have one. Question 9 is my newest favorite character. Again, I do not have one. Part of the problem with reading quickly and like reading so much is that I really haven't gotten attached to any characters. Question 10 is a book that made me cry. Like, in all honesty, ever since I ended up on medications for my anxiety, I find that I don't have as deep emotional reactions to texts. Like, I used to be a weeper. I would get so emotionally invested in these fictional characters and I would just cry for them. Like, anxiety, the medications are sort of like a mood stabilizer thing, and I have definitely noticed that in addition to helping so much with like my anxiety symptoms, like I should have been on medications for a long time, not just in like the last 2 years. I have noticed that my emotional reactions to things are not what they used to be. Like, I was definitely like a cry at the sad commercial, cry at the cute puppy kind of person before, and that doesn't happen anymore because of the medication I'm on. Part of me is a little bit upset about that I'm not emotionally connecting in the same way I used to, but then at the same time, like, the relief of the anxiety symptoms is definitely worth not crying over books anymore. A book that made me happy, Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. I reread this as a comfort read. Becky Albertalli's books are like a warm hug. I love folding up in her books. And this is a book that made me cry multiple times before I was on medication, and now I don't. So there you go, different emotional reaction, even though I feel like if I weren't on medication, I would be a lot more stressed and my hair would be falling out a lot more, and like so many things about my life would be bad, but like also I didn't cry when I read this like I have in the past. So it made me deeply, deeply happy, like so truly happy to read this, but it's another way that I've seen the medications impacting my life in interesting ways. Question number 12 is the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received. This is probably one of the more like aesthetically appealing books. It is Amanda Leduc's Disfigured on Fairy Tales, Disability, and Making Space. So this is from one of my favorite Toronto-based publishers, Coach House Books. It's good so far. It's one I would like to finish this year. The fairy tale, foresty elements happening here with like disembodied body parts and like the house and the leaves. And the last question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? Let me just scooch over here. So this is the shelf of books that I have purchased in 2020. I have been doing a lot of thinking and reflecting, especially in lockdown, about my book buying habits. I have a video on that. It's either out or coming out. I will link it if it's out. And something that is really important to me is prioritizing the things that I buy because I'm interested in them, when I'm interested in them, because I feel like a lot of these things sit on this shelf because I have purchased something with intention of a project. The first step in that project doesn't perform well on YouTube, and so I'm left with what was going to be a video series that now I'm just reading for fun. I'm not producing a video series on, but I've purchased the books for it. That'll just be a for me project. Now there's no timeline for it, that I have purchased things that are then not pressing to read. Something that I'm trying to do is to read the things I purchase when I buy them. Like if I've impulse purchased something, I should prioritize reading it and supplement my reading the rest of the time with things that I have purchased in the past. Because like I have a very recent interest in them opposed to this bookshelf, which is actually mostly things that I have purchased in the past 6 years since starting BookTube. So let me know how your 2020 is going. How has COVID impacted your reading? I can imagine that it probably went one of two ways for most people. Like, you either took all this newfound free time if you were laid off like I was and you filled it with reading, or the work from home, kids at home, upset of routine resulted in significantly less reading. So I would love to know how your 2020 is going so far in terms of reading. This has been a weird year. Before we go, we have to thank my patrons. Thank you, patrons, for making videos like this possible. I really appreciate the work that you enable me to do. If you are interested in becoming a patron and supporting the channel, links to the Patreon page are in the description box down below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.